Equity means paying attention to differences and incorporating that into the discussion, into the ideas, into the way we're working with people. Equality, on the other hand, means treating people the same. And equality there doesn't do it. Equality, and one of the big things about equality, we usually talk about equality of opportunity, giving people the same opportunity. But giving people the same opportunity does not enable for them to get the equitable chances, the equitable opportunities that they need, because we might not pay attention to their differences. And over again today, we've been hearing about the differences as related to social class, differences as related to gender, differences as related to race, differences as related to sexual identification or sexual orientation. Therefore, we're going to have to be equitable and make that, take that approach. But we just can't, in our Canadian context, I'm following my notes, in our Canadian context, there is this whole idea of multiculturalism. And multiculturalism, and we kind of prides itself on multiculturalism. The world looks on, and everyone will think that Canada does a very big, good job because it has a diverse society where it's paying attention to those cultural differences. But one of the questions I always think about that multiculturalism provokes for me is, who has culture? And who doesn't have culture? Is there any such thing as people not having culture? And do people who come in as newcomers, do they come into a vacuum, a cultural vacuum, and therefore can express the culture as they see fit? Or are they coming to an existing culture to which they have to adjust, and the culture into which they come, do some work to accommodate them, etc. So therefore, when we think of equity, we have to think of how the whole idea of multiculturalism might also make us feel as Canadians we're giving equal opportunity to everyone can express their culture as they see fit, but I don't think that's the case. Because ultimately, once people come, we want them to assimilate. And in that assimilation, and we're going to see those assimilation, it's through that assimilation we will see them as Canadians or not being different. But people are going to always have differences. But how are we able to live with differences? Are we able to live with differences, cultural differences, racial differences, or are we expecting people to say? Equity therefore requires that we constantly pay attention to the differences and not necessarily to level those differences, but see those differences as part and parcel of what it means to be a human, and so forth. So therefore, when we're working towards the kinds of an equitable society in which we live, we must constantly think about how issues such as colonialism, racism, bias, all those kind of things might have operated in influencing and influence how we deal with differences. And do we deal with differences in the same way, or do we treat people differently based on their differences? So for me then, it's paying attention to all these factors. And one of the other things I think that we need to pay attention to is how, like for example, we talk about class, we also have to see the intersections between not just class, how class intersects with race, intersects with all those kind of things, and the interrelationship between all these things. And once we're paying attention to all those factors, then we're moving. So if equity is going to be the central point that we're coming to our work with. We must constantly be seeing how am I implementing equity in my framework. And it brings me to the point of what's a theoretical framework? What the framework am I coming to this work with? And that framework for me is, if it's going to be equity, I'm going to be always wanting to see and respond to the differences in ways that make it relevant to them. So cultural differences then does not only relate to race or people coming from elsewhere. Culture is related to gender, class, other kinds of identity factors, and we need to pay attention to that. One of the discussions that I listen to quite closely, and this is an area I'm very interested in when I'm thinking of differences, is generational differences. So it's very often missed, very, very often. I think of here first generation versus second generation and versus third generation. And Statistics Canada increasingly is reminding us about how these first generational differences are. And I keep thinking of the children and families with whom you work and how those generational differences might be operating. So for example, if you notice, first generation, which are people who are born elsewhere and come here, and if you're a big sociologist, then you talk about generation and a half, generation 0.25, generation 0.75, etc. Coming before high school and coming during high school or coming after high school. All those make difference. All those contribute to differences.